Greenland is one of the largest places in the world area-wise, but not much is known about it to the outside world. There is a lot of misinformation and misconception about this beautiful Arctic country. There is so much more to this island than just ice sheets and glaciers. There is a lot of history and culture too. Did you know that Greenland is the least densely populated country in the world? Why is that so? Let's find out more about Greenland first. Greenland is the biggest island in the world that is not a continent. The total area of Greenland is 2.16 million square kilometers, or 330,000 square miles, including the offshore islands. However, almost 80% of the landmass is covered by ice caps. The country is home to many animals like polar bears, reindeer, musk oxen, Arctic foxes, and more. There are around 235 species of birds, and the Arctic waters surrounding the island country house many types of fish. The island also has the world's largest national park, Northeast Greenland National Park. Greenland is technically a part of the continent of North America, but has been associated with Europe for around 1,000 years. Almost 25% of the country's population lives in its capital city, Nuuk. The city is the biggest town on the island and has a lot of museums, cafes, and boutiques. The town also offers mesmerizing views of the mountains. The majority of the population of Greenland speaks Greenlandic and Danish. The Viking Erik the Red came to Greenland with a small group of settlers in around 983 AD. Who was Erik the Red? Well, there are a lot of stories and legends about this man, who features in many Icelandic stories. He was described as having flaming red hair and a beard, the reason for his name. Others suggest that he got his name because he had a fiery temper. Some say he was a Norwegian explorer, while others suggest that he fled from Norway with his father who was exiled for murder. Whatever the reason, they left Norway and traveled to Iceland, where Erik married a local woman from a wealthy family called Thorhild. However, Erik was convicted of the murder of two of his neighbor's sons and was exiled from Iceland. Now, Erik, unable to stay in Iceland or return to Norway, started sailing further west instead and reached Greenland. He traveled around Greenland and named many parts of the island after himself to establish ownership over the land, including Eriksfjord, now renamed Tunnelærvik Fjord, where he settled and built his home. He built his homestead at the top of a fjord in southwest Greenland, which now houses the Kvasirasuk settlement. He named the homestead Bratalio. It is now a protected World Heritage Site. There is also a church here, which is thought to have been built in the 14th century and then reconstructed. Soon, Erik established a few more settlements in the fertile, greener parts of the island and went back to Iceland to try and bring some of his fellow kinsmen to Greenland to join him. It is said that Erik told people that the new land was called Greenland because it might sound appealing to potential settlers, not unlike a PR strategy. And apparently it worked too, because he left Iceland with 35 ships full of Icelanders and their animals to inhabit Greenland. However, only 14 of the ships made it to Greenland. Greenland is the anglicized version of the name of the island. It is called Greenland in Old Norse, Grænland in modern Icelandic, and Grönland in Danish and Norwegian. However, in Greenlandic, the island is called Kalalit Nunat, which translates to the land of the Greenlanders. Another name is Inuit Nunat, meaning land of the people. This is what Greenland was called before Erik the Red arrived. As far as we know, it is quite possible that Greenland came to be known as such, so as to lure travelers and settlers into moving there. It is also possible that Greenland might have been greener 1,000 years ago when Erik the Red was there. There is evidence that shows that the southern reaches of the island had dense forests. Also, Erik landed in one of the more sheltered and temperate parts of the island, even further south than Iceland. So it is possible that for him, Greenland was full of greenery, and he was oblivious to the fact that the rest of the island was icy. Another funny fact is that Iceland doesn't really have any ice. No more than 11% of the country is covered in ice caps, while the rest of it is green. How did Iceland get its name? The island's original name was Snæland, which means snowland, but it was renamed by a Viking called Hrafna-Flóki, who saw a fjord full of icebergs and called the country Iceland. It is also said that this Viking endured a difficult time there. His daughter drowned on the way, and all his animals died during the first winter. He might have wanted to dissuade other settlers from inhabiting this place, which is why he may have chosen the less appealing name. It would have made more sense for Iceland and Greenland to have opposite names, but scientists now think that their names could be more fitting in the future. Why? Well, scientists believe that as an effect of global warming, Greenland's ice sheets will begin melting, making the country greener, making its name more befitting. Similarly, as a result of the melted ice caps, all the increased water will push the Gulf Stream further south, which might make Iceland colder and icier in the future. The people who live in Greenland are called Greenlanders, or Grønlander in Danish, or Kalalit, meaning indigenous Greenlander in the native language Kalaallisut. Around 90% of native Greenlanders are descended from the Inuits, which is why they refer to themselves as Kalalit. The Kalalit are an Inuit tribe who come from western Greenland. There are other smaller tribes as well, the Tanumiit from eastern Greenland and the Inuguit from the north of the island. But since the Kalalit are the majority, this is the name that has been adopted for general use. Citizens of Greenland are called Kalalit or Greenlanders. Greenland has a geopolitical area of 2,166,086 square kilometers and has a population of 55,847 in 2016. The population density was 0.0259 people per square kilometers, or 0.067 people per square mile. In 2018, the population increased slightly to 56,564, making the population density 0.0261 per square kilometer. So technically, Greenland has less than one person living per square mile. This makes Greenland the least densely populated country in the world. There are 57.3 million square miles of land on Earth. However, according to the World Bank, 95% of the Earth's population lives on just 10% of that land. Then what about the other 90% of land? There are a lot of factors at play, and is the same case with Greenland. Climate and geography are important factors when it comes to population density. Look at some of the most sparsely populated regions on Earth. All of them have limited access to fresh water, which includes deserts and Arctic zones. There are also some regions with dense rainforests that are impossible to penetrate, high and wild mountains, or regions which are isolated from the continental zones by miles and miles of oceans. When there is no geographical accessibility or the climate is not very favorable, these lands tend to be much less populated than others. Although Greenland has a large surface area, most of the land is uninhabitable. Located in the far north, 75% of the land is covered by a permanent ice sheet. In Greenland, the 56,367 people are spread over 158,476 square miles, but 80% of that land is covered by a massive glacier. The Arctic and subarctic temperatures of the country range from the 30s to the 50s during summers and are always below zero in the winter. The capital of the country, Nuuk, has an average temperature of 14 degrees in January and an average high of 50 degrees in July. The southwest coast of the island has the mildest climate, which is where most of the population is located. Because of this temperature, the population can practice very little agriculture. Most of the produce from Greenland includes forage crops, greenhouse vegetables, sheep, reindeer, and fish. Greenland mostly relies on other countries for imports. The Greenland ice sheet spreads over 656,000 square miles, covering most of the island and about 3 times the area of Texas. The ice sheets are melting at the rate of about 1 millimeter per year. If the entire Greenland ice sheet were to melt, the sea levels would rise by nearly 23 feet. The warmer air and thinning ice also allows a greater number of dark algae to grow on the ice. The algae absorb more heat from the sun, thus accelerating the melting. Greenland saw a total of just 761 newborn children in 2021, the lowest since World War II. By 2040, the working age population of Greenland is estimated to see a decrease of 16%, the largest decline in the region. A decline in Greenland's fertility rate was due to economic modernization. But what has that got to do with fertility? Well, modernization is not always a natural process. Sometimes it is implemented and forced. Greenland is one of the results of engineered modernity. Denmark has colonized Greenland for a long time. In 1950, the government started an ambitious project to modernize the people of Greenland economically and especially culturally, despite a 1946 decision by Greenland's native leaders to reject modernization. First step, bring in alcohol. Denmark introduced the sale of alcohol in Greenland, which did not bring about many good results. Then, from 1952 to 1968, the government started a huge campaign of housing and infrastructure expansion to push Greenlanders into urbanization. They were encouraged to move out of small villages into few urban centers with better public service access. Education was switched to Danish. There also became political modernity when the usual democratic, socialist, liberal, and rightist parties formed during the 1970s. This aggressive modernization by Denmark provoked the population of Greenland to resist and lead the country into self-government in 2009. In 1967, the Danish government began a major campaign to promote IUDs. At this time, Greenland had one of the highest birth rates in the world. Not just that, the incidence of venereal disease was high, and the condom and pessary were the only contraceptives available and not used very often. As a result, the country was in dire need of an effective contraceptive program. However, in just 8 years, by 1974, the fertility rates fell from 7 children per woman to 2.3. This was the fastest fertility transition in history. Not even China was so successful with its one-child policy. Greenland has a high rate of abortions, which also results in a decline of population, and thus affecting the population density of the country. According to Landslægeembedet, the Board of Health in Greenland, the country's birth rate is much lower than its number of abortions. This is despite the decrease in the number of abortions in recent years. In 2018, the island saw a 10-year peak of 931 abortions. It lowered to 902 in 2019, 889 in 2020, and in 2021, there were 842 abortions, lower than the previous years but in no way a small number. Greenland is an exception when it comes to the number of foreign-born people in its population. The number has increased everywhere else in the Nordic region, but in Greenland, the proportion of foreign-born people declined from 17% in 1990 to 10% in 2018. Greenland has a large number of immigrants, but the largest group is 15 to 25-year-olds. According to Lars Pedersen of Statistics Greenland, a third of the country's immigrants name education as the reason they leave. Half of the Greenlanders who go abroad for education do not return. Losing young adults in their prime years also reduces the fertility rate of the country. In 1991, Greenland had around 1,200 live births, after which the number sloped downwards. In 2007, 800 babies were born. Thus, immigration also led to a shrinking population. In 1950, suicide was almost non-existent in Greenland. In 1960, there were 2 suicides. According to a study, the average rate of suicide was around 0.3 suicides per 100,000 people. Even when suicides did occur, it was usually the older population. But from 1970, the suicide rate increased exponentially, peaking in the early 1990s with around 107 suicides per 100,000 people. Additionally, nearly all the suicides were among teenagers and young people, making the losses even greater as far as population decline was concerned. In 2010, Greenland's suicide rate was 100 per 100,000, the highest in the world. No other country has a rate even half that. The labor market in Greenland is also sparse, often having trouble filling skilled positions. The health sector especially suffers, as doctors and nurses are in very short supply. 1 in every 4 health sector positions is vacant. Greenland was even thinking about renting doctors and nurses from Iceland. Greenland is estimated to see the largest decline in its working age population, 16% in the next 20 years. The country has the highest proportion of jobs in sectors like agriculture, forestry, and fisheries among all the Nordic countries. Between 2009 and 2017, the number of jobs increased by more than 5%, which is among the largest increase in the Nordic regions. Hunger is a prevalent topic in Greenland, something that is not often brought into focus. The Greenland Home Rule government published a national report on the food policy of Greenland in 2004. The report showed that 11% of children between the ages of 10 and 17 were reported often hungry or always hungry when they were going to school or going to bed. This hunger that exists among children in Greenland also throws some light on the performance deficiencies regarding health, development, and academic performance. Food insecurity in Greenland was related to neglect. Parents had other economic discrepancies to deal with that were related to single families, living on welfare, immigration issues, low education levels, and so on. The relationship between Denmark and Greenland dates back many centuries ago. We now know how Erik the Red established a community in Greenland. For around 5 centuries, Norse settlers made the icy land their home, despite the harsh conditions and sparse resources. But then, for some reason, the Viking descendants completely disappeared from Greenland, quite abruptly. In the early 18th century, a Christian missionary named Hans Egede traveled from Scandinavia to the western settlement in Greenland and tried to re-establish contact with the Norse settlers, who had not been heard from for hundreds of years. Egede never found his fellow Norsemen, but instead found the Inuit people, who were interested in the Danes. This soon led to a period of immigration between Denmark and Greenland. Today, around 88% of Greenland's population are direct descendants of Inuits and have mixed Inuit and Danish lineage. There is also a majority who are purely Danish, so Greenlanders today are an indigenous mix of Arctic and Danish influences. Therefore, the relationship between Greenland and Denmark is centuries old and quite complicated. In 2019, the then-President Donald Trump made headlines and caused a controversy when he expressed a desire to purchase Greenland from Denmark. Now, it was anybody's guess why he made the comment, but either way, it caused a rightful uproar in Greenland and Denmark. Leaders of both Greenland and Denmark reaffirmed that not only is Greenland not for sale, but Greenland is not even Denmark's to sell. The Prime Minister of Greenland, Kim Kielsen, responded to Trump's comments by declaring that Greenland was not for sale in no uncertain terms, and even if it were, the bidding would need to be directed to Greenland and not Denmark. A similar stance was taken by Denmark's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, who said Greenland is not Danish, Greenland is Greenlandic. This was just history repeating itself, as in 1946, the United States had offered to buy Greenland from Denmark, which then technically did own it, but the country refused to sell the island. However, Greenland's demographics have changed since the late 1970s. While the number of Swedish and Norwegian immigrants has reduced, the number of new arrivals from Iceland and Asian countries like Thailand and the Philippines has increased exponentially. This is the story of Greenland, and why is it the least densely populated country in the world? Would you ever think of staying in Greenland? Tell us in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and share it, and subscribe to our channel for more such content.